everyone, and welcome to our circle and Salve Women. Today is 101 talk, and so for today, I'm going to again be transparent and focus on parenting, most specifically speaking on motherhood. And this has to do with, I believe it's in the numbers, literally, because I'm going to share a story with you just in connection, in pairing with my article that I've written on salvewomen.com. This is about really some of the things that your parents say to you that stick, and you know that you're being challenged because of the things that they've stated. And the very statement that my father had said that stuck with me and had really challenged me, all in positive light, didn't have any, bitterness toward it or anything, is that he had stated his mom, who is ultimately, undoubtedly, was the person that he truly admired, never ever raised her voice and, never yelled. And so it was kind of like an indirect hit to me because he never stated it. He never showed any dislike for when I did raise my voice with my children. And in fact, I think he had actually taken a little bit of that as a fault, because I do recall him, us having a conversation where he did say, he asked me one time, what was the one, was he being a good father? Gosh, I still remember that conversation. Or was he a good father? And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, well, you yelled a lot. Could have said so many things, I said, but you are a really, really good dad, Papa. And, he looked down and he goes, I know. Like, it was such a -1 point for him in his mind without him stating it. And yet when he made the point to, and in another conversation, talk about how he admired his mom because she never raised her voice, it was kind of an indirect hit to me because I know I had carried on his, I would say, trait to raise, your voice as a mother, in his case as a father. And because perhaps I admired him, I'm not putting him to a fault. I admired him so much. It was my truest admiration. Perhaps I made it okay for me to yell at my kids, but I, later on found out that was just really me, and owning it 100% that's my nerves. And I've worked at it ever since. However, I want you to know that even after child number 5, it has hit me that I am still working on it, but I have gotten so much better. And so again, in connecting to my article, I'm really stating that I believe it's in the numbers. Mind you, my father was child number 9. Yes, that's true. 9. And so for me, I laugh because if he was here now, and I probably would have had more time to process it, and I would have had some good times to tell him, hey, Papa, you were child number 9, and I want you to know I've been working on it since the time that you made that statement about your mom, not ever raising her voice, because it has truly been a positive challenge for me. It's like, man, I got to work on that, because of the fact that my greatest admiration was my Papa, growing up, and really, gosh, after he left, realizing how much more I truly admired him, that now I realize that because he had truly admired his mom, it was more of like, okay, this is my challenge. And so I'd worked on that. And, with all my spunk, with all my fire within my system, I knew that there were times that I just could not hold myself back at times when I did raise my voice amongst my children. And I know that probably my oldest had it the worst. Because, when it's your first child, and I was a very young mother, you had so much fire. I mean, you talk about loving hard. For those of you who, can relate to your first child, versus any children that you've had thereafter, you put your blood and sweat into your first one, because it's like, this is it. I am a mother. I mean, it opens up this world where that you have essentially left your world and you have entered theirs, and now you are their protector. And every little move they made, everything that they stated that were questionable, you then felt compelled to be that person to either fight, flight, or freeze in the moment of danger where you sense danger for your child. And so yes, I was guilty for raising my voice quite many more times with my first child versus my second and then my third. Now mind you, our first three were 12 years separate from our younger two, because when my career kicked in, and I was certified and in teaching, but I stayed at home with my first three, focused in on them, and then all of a sudden I decided to really put my certification to work, and that got caught up. And so I had time to really process parenting in the midst of me teaching. And then I honestly believe that it was in my teaching where my students taught me to be not just a better parent, but a better self. Because there were times where, in the moment, you wouldn't even realize when you are around people who have raised their voice throughout your life, you don't even realize that your nerves have accustomed itself to that. And you can relate this to anything. If you are a person that, may say some things and have somewhat discharged yourself of any fault to the things you say or to the things you do, because it was something that was well acquainted in your environment growing up, you don't even realize that it is not something that others feel comfortable or are wanting to have into their circle. And so there were times where my students, I still remember one of my students, and this was just maybe about less than 5 years ago, when I had our baby number 5, our child number 5. At that time, just me going back to work, realizing I was meant to go back to work, because just being a parent, it really put me to a test on how I could control myself. And then I realized that I was no longer the stay-at-home mom once I entered the world of teaching, and that is where I belonged. I felt like this was my sense of belonging. And so going back to work, then I realized, oh my goodness, there was still this part in me, this fire in me that was so quick to really correct my students just in the same way that I would correct my children. Somewhat different. And I know for those of you who are parents and teachers at the same time, your heart is there, but there is that, there is that border where that they go home after you. So after they see you. So there's this part where you're like, oh gosh, I only have so much of a time to say or plant whatever I can in them before they move on to the next class and to the next class and to the next class. And so I still remember one of my students, DeAndre, saying, why are you mad all the time? And I was, when a child or a student tells you this, it brings me back to when my children would say things to me and make me go, am I really sounding like I'm mad or so? And so it is this moment of the more children that you have. And for me, it was 5 of my own children. And yet, in addition to that, my students that were really helping me out, if I ever brought any energy that was not to their liking to school. And trust me, I always thought I was number one for knowing how to compartmentalize my feelings, so that even if I was having a moment of a struggle in the morning, if I was not feeling like up to my 10 and I was coming in like maybe at a 5 or 6, I felt like as soon as I entered my room, I could bring myself back up to an 8, sometimes to even a 10. And yet, whatever had entered my mind, throughout that day, perhaps was oozing out, and I wasn't even recognizing it. And could be maybe in the things that I might have suggested or stated in the manner that I stated that. And so I remember when DeAndre stated that, and I was like, oh my goodness, if that is how my students are seeing me, this is not good, because I don't want to seem angry. I just, it's that protectiveness as a parent, as a teacher, where you see so much in future in every one of the children that are in front of you, and you are trying to protect them, and you're trying to make them care, and you're trying to make them really understand that there's so much to prepare for in this world. and it's beyond what you could give them in the subject matter that you're teaching them. And it's the same thing at home. And yet I realized by the time I got to my child number 5, I had given my fire and my fire and my fire and my fire and my fire, so that by the time I got to baby number 5, it had somewhat depleted any of the fire that I had from child number 1. And it hit me I'm like, wow, I'm not raising my voice anymore. And I always called it projecting at school, because when you have a classroom and you have a big room, you felt like you had to have a stance sometimes, depending on the energy that you had in a classroom. Every teacher knows that sometimes if you are in an environment where the energy is higher, you got to bring it to that energy or try to de-escalate it, and you learn certain ways to try to bring it up or bring it back down, or wherever it need be, enable for kids to really retain some learning. And at home, however, because they were mine from every moment of every breath, even when they were away from me, when they came back home, it was always this fire that I had in me to make sure that they were standing strong amongst any attacks in the world. And the way that I was feeling like I was training them is to be hard and be strong myself. And yet, now that I look at my child number 5, it's like I became more of a let go parent. Not let go as in neglectful, but let go as in, you know what? You just got to have faith. You got to be trusting that all will work out. And really, truly, from the help of my husband, always reminding me that, because it just got to a point where I knew that my yelling wasn't being heard anymore. Me raising my voice, if they were doing something at the park where I felt like they were going to get hurt and I'm yelling from across, I kid you not, like last year with our mask on, or we're walking around in the park, and all of a sudden I felt like my son was going too fast on his bike, and I yelled. I didn't even realize the whole world around me had stopped. And there weren't that many people at the time we were walking in this one particular place, but my husband pointed out to me, everyone's watching you. And I'm one of those moms that's like, when I love hard. And if I'm yelling, to get my child's attention, not to be demeaning, but really to protect them and saying, hey, be careful and so forth. The world is not a care to me. The child is my care. But at that given point, it hit me, and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that I was yelling. I was more of just, my world became one with my child. And so at home, I started to realize, like, wow, I don't see myself yelling as much, because the more throughout the years of parenting, from my oldest being 27 now to my youngest being 7, I realized that I had to let go of my fear on the inside. I had to make sure that I could trust the world more, because I was becoming this wreck inside. And it was like I was always having my fire ready, my shield up, everything to protect my children. And it became a point where it was starting to drain me the more worry I had in me. And so I really like to think that my grandmother, baby number 9, she probably got it by baby number 7. And so my papa, my dad, probably got the best of her, where she could only just love, and love with faith, and love with so much honor for her children, and no longer feeling like, she had to raise her voice to be heard. It was probably in her touch, and her gentility, and her sweetness, and her kindness that really was able to come out of her and illuminate, out of her and into her children. And they got to see this very soft-spoken person by the time that my papa, child number 9, was around. But I am done at 5, and I can only say to my grandmother, I'm getting there. I can only say to my papa, I am getting there. I am getting to that point where I feel so good at myself for knowing how to let go, so that I can be at peace within myself, and so my children will see the peace within me. And I know that my students see the peace within me, because I tell you, I look at myself and I laugh and think, wow, from the first time that I taught to the years to follow now, I've learned to let go, and I've learned to trust, and I've learned to just say, they're going to be okay. These children are going to be okay. And that's all you can do, is have that trust in you, and then just plant what you can when you have them, and cherish the moments that you have with them. And I know that that's what my grandma did for my papa, because that's all my papa could remember, is just pure admiration, have for my grandmother, is pure admiration for her. And you know, one of these days, perhaps I will get to that level, but until then, I'll continue to challenge myself, and I'm okay with knowing I'm not there yet, one day at a time. So in the words of my mother, God bless us all. Do you, do the best you can. And if you don't feel like you're getting it right today, it's okay. Get it right tomorrow. And if you don't get it right tomorrow, it's okay. Get it right the next day. But at least you live in that honor for yourself, and that you, in the back of your mind, know that you are going in the right direction. You're living a righteous life. You're doing good for you and those around you, and you are loving hard, and you know that, and life is good. Thank you so much for listening today. We'll see you next time.